to have an opportunity to speak to you today and talk a little bit about the pier and legal costs and talk about some next steps. So that's what we'll be covering this morning. First of all, I'd like to introduce Mayor Goldman, Councillors Craven, Mead Ward, Dennison, and Taylor. I think I've got everybody.
And Jeff, just before you start, I just want to welcome everybody on behalf of Council to get the update on the pier litigation process. It's very important that your presence is appreciated. We have 100% confidence in our city manager to resolve this issue and give you an update in a very, very appropriate way. Our city manager has led us to great success on other legal issues, including the Nelson Quarry application, as well as the Burlington Airport issues. So just want to say that just before we get going. Sorry, Jeff, back to you.
Okay. I also have with us Angela Morgan, our city clerk, Nancy Shea-Nicola, our city solicitor, and Don Kell looks after our communications. So if in the event that I can't answer any of the questions this morning you have posed to me, I'll be turning to those folks and perhaps they can answer your questions for you. Just turn to the agenda for this morning. What we'd like to do is make it informal as possible, make it informative as possible, and in terms of sharing some information with you about what the project has been, where we've been, what the chronology is all about, how much we've spent so far to date, potentially what our next steps might be, weigh our options, and then open it up for questions. And I know at the end of the session you have the opportunity to speak to members of council and the mayor. So in terms of what our objectives this morning are, I'm sure people are wondering, what is it we hope to accomplish? So the first thing that we want to do is disclose our fees. And these are the external aggregate fees that we incur to date. This is what council has directed me to do this morning, and we will be doing that. But I think secondly, it's just as important to signal to the community the critical next steps that we face. And we're completing our discovery process right now. I think most of you are familiar with what that term means. It really is finding out what every party knows and sharing that information amongst the parties. And at the end of that process, we have to make a determination about how we go forward. So I'll be discussing that with you this morning and what the next steps are in terms of resolving those matters. Now, just a little bit of an introduction here in terms of our practice of disclosing legal fees. This is an issue that's in the media and the communities across the province right now in terms of disclosing legal fees and matters relating to litigation. So this is not unusual for the city of Burlington. It's something that is being, I think, first and foremost in a lot of people's minds about disclosing these types of fees. So I'll talk a little bit what our standard practice is. And then I can discuss a little bit with you what the Freedom of Information request is that's before us and where we stand with that. So we do have a policy. It governs what we can and cannot do. It was adopted in December of 2011. And we'll have copies for you this morning to share with you. But if I go to the next slide, you'll see that this is basically the outline of what that policy is the council has approved. So you'll see that provisions are made in case there is a Freedom of Information request. You'll see that the costs that can be released are aggregate costs, that some of the issues relating to billing and the other legal expenses are not included within that policy. So this is a standard practice that we do follow. And normally what we would do is we would disclose those fees at the end of the litigation process and make that public at that time. Just wanted to recognize Councilor Blair. Thank you. So that's our standard practice, and that's the practice that we were following. If you're familiar with the Nelson aggregate legal proceedings, we did that when we concluded those proceedings. So that's the practice that we normally follow. If I go to the next slide, you'll see that in terms of freedom of information, there are rights and privileges that people have in terms of our government today. And they have the right to access that information and make those requests, and there's a process that we need to follow when that freedom of information request is made. So there's a formalized process around that, and the clerk is involved in seeing that we do all things necessary to meet that request. And as you know, the post has made that request of us. Go to the next slide. You'll see where we stand in terms of that process right now. We've now got a mediator that's been assigned. And that mediator will be discussing, and has been discussing between the parties, what is necessary. We've actually refined that request from the post in the last few weeks. Whether or not that continues, you'll see that the adjudicator can be appointed and assigned to review the positions of the parties, and at some point in time, a final order will be made. So we still are in that process, and We're not looking at this, I guess the disclosure today to make that process go away. That's still part of what we have to do. If I go to the chronology, this project's been with us for a long time. I know that when I came on board, it was an interest of the council to see that the pier got built. I'm happy to say that the pier is built. But we've never suggested for a minute that the project was over. We've always suggested that we had to conclude all legal proceedings, and until those legal proceedings were finished and finalized and settlements put in place, that was work that's still to be done. So if we go back, we're really looking in terms of 2006 when the groundbreaking occurred. We did run into problems in 2008 and 2009 in terms of the project being stalled, and there was some construction issues at the time. At that moment, all parties legaled up. So everybody took legal counsel at that time. So the disclosure this morning is really talking about the cost we've incurred in 2008. You'll see by the rest of the sort of chronology, and a lot of these are just highlights. All of this information is available on our website. We are now at the point where the discovery process is almost final. And again, I alluded to it earlier, that does tell us what others know and what we share with others. So that's an important, I guess, milestone that we reach in the legal proceedings. We've also set some mediation dates. So those are set for June of 2014. And I must say that we've split these dates a number of times. I think you need to realize that it's not just the city's efforts that have to come together in setting these dates. All parties have to agree and mediation can occur. And that means that everybody has to be available. So while we've tried to push for earlier mediation, this is the date we have now, and whether or not we actually conclude that. Let me just make a point about this. We are entering in this. It's very similar to what happened with the last term of council. We're getting very close to the end of this term. And it's important that this not be a politicized issue. So what we've tried to do is make sure that we're providing you with the information today that's administratively our responsibility to do. We manage the legal process on behalf of council. We update council on a regular basis. They are advised of where we are in the process. At some point in time, as we near the election, if we haven't got mediation concluded or settlements aren't reached, this will slip into the next term of council. That's exactly what happened with this process the last time. The project had been started with actually 2 councils ago, and this council inherited the issue and had to move forward. And I remind everybody we had 3 new councillors at the time and a new mayor. So these types of changes occur in terms of local government. And so when we're looking at our June 14, 2014 date, we're hopeful, but I'm not convinced that that will actually come about. The next slide, please. So for those of you interested in terms of who's all involved, what are the parties that are involved in this action, you'll see that from this slide who's involved. The only one that's been released so far is Bravo Cement. All parties have agreed that they have nothing to do with the proceedings going forward. I'm going to stop there for a minute where you can see that. You will get a copy of this presentation after I finish, so that you have this information. Next slide, please. So here are the costs to date. The first cost is net after taxes. So I think you all realize that HST is reclaimable in some cases. So the total gross costs are 1,349,952. And after you take the tax rebate off, the cost of the taxpayer today is 1,228,040. Stop there for a minute while you can get that number. I indicated to you the discovery process now is near completion, and we're at that point where we're going to incur additional costs. That's for everybody. So when I'm talking about where we stand right now, these are not costs that are completed. This is to date. The cost of the pier is $14.4 million as we know it right now. And that excludes legal costs. Anybody wondering what the total cost of the taxpayer? It's 14.4 plus the legal fees on top of that. And as you can expect, the meter is running right now, so there will be additional costs incurred. Next slide, please. So what can happen next? We could reach settlements with everybody, and that can happen at any time. We could seek mediation in terms of the court rules, and that's what we've done. We've indicated to you that's tentatively set up for June of 2014. Or we can go to trial. I think you're familiar with what happens once we get there. Next slide. So in terms of weighing our options, and I think this is probably the most critical slide in my deck, to be honest with you. The costs are what they are. We've been prudent in terms of managing those costs. But going forward, we have to look at it from the perspective of what's in the best interest of the taxpayer and what is the business decision that we need to make at City Hall. We know there's uncertainty involved in the trial, and we know there's substantial costs in terms of continuing litigation. So we're going to have to make some judgments and decisions with the council involved in those judgments and decisions about how we proceed and what happens over the next couple of months. So we know what we know today, and given what we know, how strong is our case, how strong are the cases of the others involved, and what would we do, given on balance, and given the probability of success going forward, what would be the decision that the city should make in these circumstances. One final thing, we could expect the discussion to be ongoing. I can say to you that that's confidential and without prejudice. I can't indicate whether or not those discussions are happening. You can assume that those discussions go on frequently between the parties, but we're not free to acknowledge whether that is not happening. So I'd like to open up for questions. I hope we've been to the point, and whatever you'd like to ask, we'll try to answer. Please.
Yes, I'm Gary Scobie, a taxpayer.
Here.
I'd like to ask a question. I noticed on the one slide you had, you said disclosure of fees after the fact as directed by council. Does this imply that council can also direct you not to disclose fees?
Yes.
And has that happened in the past?
We've showed you what the policy is, and you follow that policy.
Has that happened in the past where council has said not to disclose fees after the
To
fact?
my knowledge, and I've only been here for a couple of years, I don't think we've actually had a freedom of information request for legal fees. If we have, it's not familiar to me, so we've been following standard trial policy.
Thank you.
Does the city have a reserve to cover whatever costs they might incur in the event that you settle or you lose?
I think most municipalities, what we have is it's almost like a savings account for litigation. And we put money away in the regular budget on a regular basis in the operating budget to make sure that we have that bank account. It's called a reserve. And we have a legal fund reserve, and we draw down from that reserve. So it's replenished on a regular basis, and it's drawn down on a need basis as well. So it's not coming out. This cost is not an extra cost to the taxpayer.
I was wondering why now? Why not hold off to the end or do it right at the beginning?
Well, to be honest, we got the freedom of information request, and that caused us to consider whether or not it would be appropriate to do something at this point in time. As I indicated to you earlier, other municipalities have been faced with the same types of questions. In terms of where we stand, I think it's important to signal to the community we're moving to the next phase. So we thought in terms of things aligning, it was appropriate to disclose the fees where we are right now, and to say to the community we need to manage going forward and be as prudent in the future, make good decisions on how we can resolve matters. So I'm basically saying that today. We are where we are right now, and the next phase is critical in the next few months.
Is this something we can expect ongoing with this issue and other issues that may come up legally with the city, that it'll be disclosed from time to time?
I think there's going to be continued requests. I indicated earlier in my remarks that municipalities are being asked to disclose legal fees. And it's coming not only from the public, but from the media. People are curious and interested to know how the tax dollars are being spent. So, we have a policy in place right now. Whether or not this will initiate a change in that policy, we'll see.
Well, so it's based on request, you were saying, is that right?
Right now, we're responding to the request.
But if in the future it would be the same thing based on request, or might this be at the beginning?
I'm sure council is going to review their current policy after this fact and potentially change the policy as need be, if they think it's necessary.
Hi, Jeff. I know we're talking about aggregate total cost, but for residents who might not be familiar with litigation, can you give us a list of some of the factors that are included in that cost, such as hourly rates or if there's travel expense? Just break it down a little bit further
I think
for our
that's,
readers.
again, and to everyone here, why we put the policy up there is to say that we're not at liberty to do that, and I haven't been given authorization to do that.
Now, do these costs include the legal costs for the Herm Schulteis case against the city, or just the city's cases?
Nancy, I'll let you answer that.
The costs incurred that were reported on today include all legal costs.
Can you tell me, I have a two-part question. If the city won all of its lawsuits, can you tell me the aggregate amount that the taxpayer would recover?
I can tell you what the claim is.
Yes, what the claim, the
The
total
claim
claim?
is 10 million. So as I indicated to you, now we have to weigh on probability and on balance, how strong is our case and what do you think we could recover given what we've spent in legal costs and what future costs will be and how will that come back to the city. So that all will be assessed in the next several months.
Okay, the second part of my question is on the reverse. If, for the people that are suing the city, if they won all of their cases, how much could it cost the city?
That I don't know.
You don't know what the amounts are?
I do not know that information. Nancy, are you involved on that?
I believe the claim by Harm Schulteis and Sons is in the neighborhood of $2.5 million.
And that is
There
the
would-
only lawsuit actually against the city?
Well, that would be one. There are several lawsuits, but it's primarily HSS, and they are the major claim.
Do these costs include the cost of consultants for witnesses and so on? And what's his name? Marshall Morrison Hirschfield, for instance, these costs all include, are they just legal costs or do they include the costs of the witnesses?
These are just legal costs. We haven't used expert witnesses as yet in the litigation. Those are consulting costs that were incurred in sorting out the issues prior to the litigation.
Hi, Jeff, can you or will you sort of comment on the internal costs? The legal costs are one part. Obviously, this issue has taken a lot of time and effort of this council in the city over the last 4 years or 8 years, but wrapped in there is a whole bunch of legal time from your solicitor and staff and things like that. What about those costs? Can those be divulged?
It's an interesting thing. Most municipalities have legal departments, and the reason they do that is to keep their legal costs in check. And so we do have a legal department that's established with a number of lawyers. And as you know, we have a number of different litigations proceeding all at the same time. We don't break them out to those specific. To the taxpayer, we have a budget for that department, and that budget then covers all our staff time.
So in the 1.2 million is your staff time for
No,
legal?
there's no staff time in that. This is external legal costs only.
Okay, so my comment is, have you any idea of the total amount that the city has spent in terms of staff, legal or otherwise, on this file?
We don't track it.
Can you track it? If someone asks for that?
Yes, we could.
Thank you.
The motion that went before council on Monday indicated McLaughlin and Associates was hired in 2008. Are you able to give us a more specific time within 2008 that they were hired?
The month?
Yes, that month would be great.
They were hired, we first consulted with them, I'm going to say it was November of 2008. Late fall, I'm going to say November.
All right, thank you so much.
Mary McMahon, Lakeshore Road. I was just wondering if there's any setup that would allow, if we won the case, for the opposition to pay the...
The legal costs?
Yes.
Sometimes there's legal cost recovery, not ad hoc. So it's depending on how strong your suit is and whether, what in the judgment of the court, how they would assign that. So it's, I'm going to say at this point in time, it's unlikely you'll get full recovery.
That might be part of arbitration as well.
It could very well be.
My name is Tom Sutherland. I'm resident of Burlington, and I've been a lawyer for many years and a judge in civil court. I'm concerned about paragraph 2. Upon the final completion of a matter, full public disclosure. That's what concerns me. This meeting and any disclosure of what's gone on, and that's the concern. As council knows, who's representing the city, there's such a thing as offers to settle. And you just answered about possibility of who's going to pay the cost for the city. And that's my concern here. The city is pursuing a matter which they believe should be successful. There's still more discoveries that have to be held, and you mentioned there's arbitration, and then of course pre-trials prior to trial. I'm concerned that any of this information is being disclosed, and you mentioned the policy. What does it say? Upon the final completion of a matter, public disclosure will be made. And I don't understand why this meeting was held. I appreciate council's made a decision, so you're acting on their wishes. What was it, about 6-1? And I can't believe that council for the city, outside council, I believe was hesitant at the meeting, I'm told, from someone else I was there, and asked that very question, the risk factor. And council knows all about offers to sell and the impact they may have on costs. I hope I don't have to explain that. Someone who's in authority to do so can explain that to the public if they wish.
Again, I'm not at liberty to say will be discussed in camera. The limited amount that was discussed, I believe, on Tuesday, we did have a 6-1 vote where that was considered, so it's a strong point, and policy is there, so the point's well taken.
What's the urgency of having this meeting? You know, we talk about everything above board that the public know. Yes, at the appropriate time. And that's clearly, in my view, not the appropriate time today.
I acknowledge that point. If that's all the questions. As I indicated to you, the councillors are here. I'm sure you're going to want to get the opinions from them. They're free to make their own particular comments relative to this. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.